Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Shannon Scott with Grave Talks, coming to you from Savannah, Georgia. Location not too far from Bonaventure Cemetery, but there's an old saying in Savannah. It's become really almost like a staple statement about Savannah, Georgia, and that is that it's a city built on top of its own dead. And really, we've got a whole culture from ancient burial mounds that really Savannah is located within and around. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of ancient burial mounds of mysterious people, some of the oldest burial mounds in North America. And we have a lot of what we call like lost cemeteries, where let's say a factory got built and, the old mill workers cemetery, got shuffled to the side or completely compromised, or as the neighborhoods expanded, there were opportunities for people to move the graves, and the city rolled on. But now and again, just from lots of events, a cemetery kind of withers and wanes, and the headstones fade, and really neighborhoods build up around them. And that's really kind of what we've come to explore today with a resident and history passion named John Perry. Good day, John Perry.
Good day, Sean.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing great.
And, of course, no mystery, we've known each other for quite a while, but we'll pretend that we haven't. But I know, as you can tell, we're out close to, I guess it's Hunter, aren't we?
Hunter Army.
Yeah, Hunter is that way. And tell us where we are and how, let's say, the battle for a cemetery survival has come to light, if that's a fair way of phrasing it.
Well, that's a great thing. Right here's a little corner lot. This was once owned by John Ezra Henley, and before that was part of a larger plantation. And then right across the street, this is where Nicholsonville was.
Nicholsonville.
Now, Nicholsonville has a very interesting history. It was originally part of a larger plantation too, but when it became a town was when the slaves who were freed after the Civil War, they lived on St. Catherine's Island, and they were relocated here from that island to where there was other indigenous freed slave population, and they formed a community. And this right here, and I really didn't even know this until recently, this is where that stood. There were 11 major players in that, but there are more lots than that and more family groups. But that was right there. And then this right here, according to the oral traditions from historical documents we've been able to find, is the most likely location of a graveyard that even predates Nicholsonville. It was all the way back into the slave era. And it's not only a graveyard, there was a praise house that was located here at one time.
And so when you say all the way back into the slave era, are we talking 18th century?
Like 1820s.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this would have been really fairly far from what we consider the historic district.
Yeah, we're about 11 miles from downtown Savannah.
11 miles, so this is all plantation world out here.
Yes. There were a couple plantations that butted up against each other right here, but even prior to that, this was all one massive plantation. You spoke about like ancient people's burial grounds. Further back, quarter mile, half a mile that way, there used to be a Native American burial ground.
Wow.
So yeah, that existed into the 1960s and 70s, but the development over there, unfortunately, that was lost.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we've lost so much that way. So, and tell us basically a little bit about the documents that kind of confirm the grounds as being what they are.
Well, I got to go a little bit back
Okay.
about how I came to be involved with this. About
Sure.
3 years ago, right down there is the back entrance to Savannah Country Day.
Yep.
The school expressed interest in buying this, and everybody from the neighborhood told them, you don't want to do that, that's a graveyard.
Right.
Well, they backed off. This is 3 years ago. And then in 2022, the fall of 2022, found out that they had actually bought it when they went ahead and tried to rezone it. So that's how we found out just before Thanksgiving.
Sure.
And the hearing was 5 days before Christmas. went down to the hearing and listened to their attorney that they retained, and that's where the documentations come in. Because he admitted before the Municipal Planning Commission that, yes, the county says this is a cemetery, but we think they're wrong. Well, the problem is it's not just the county that says it. The county has maps that say it. The city has maps that say it. The tax commission already had it as a cemetery. I have documentation all the way back to the 1800s,
Sure.
1890, talking about this as a cemetery.
Right.
The writings of John Ezra Henley, who owned this land. He was the last person that owned this land before it was sold to become the West Wellwood neighborhood that it currently is. He talked about it being a hidden cemetery. In fact, he used that word, hidden cemetery, and the reason they called it that was after the end of slavery, while a lot of the emancipated blacks were respectful and honored their fact that they had ancestors there was a mind shift of hey, we want to have our own cemetery as well. Well, the road that we're on right now,
Sure.
this is Cedar Grove. About a mile and a half that way is Cedar Grove Cemetery. That's not on Cedar Grove Road.
Huh.
Well, you would sit there and ask yourself, well, if we have a road named Cedar Grove, and
Right.
we have a cemetery that's not on Cedar Grove Road, why are we calling it there? You would think that would be a logical question to ask.
Sure.
Well, apparently Savannah Country Day doesn't like to ask questions because they just said, oh no, that was the cemetery, ignoring the fact that oral tradition, it's interesting, even on this street right here, I have a lady, glad to call her my neighbor and getting to know her. She recalls, she's in her 60s now. I better get her age right. She's going to kill me if I'm calling her older. So she looks 30 though. But she recalled when she was a child, this was just a dirt road. She was about 8 years old, and they walked. They had a tradition where they would walk from White Bluff. At that time, you could walk through here, loop around, and walk about a mile down to the cemetery, mile and a half. And they would walk by this spot that was an overgrown lot at that time. It was not as cleared as it was now. You still had the trees, but you had a lot of low brush. And she was told by her great uncle, this is where we used to be buried, right over here.
Wow.
And she's a descendant of the people that were freed on St. Catherine's Island. And like I said, there was also people that had been slaves that were here when they were freed, and they just kind of merged into a community. And it is my absolute belief, based on all the historical documents from John Ezra Henley, from the oral traditions. In fact, there's a book called Drums and Shadows that was written back in the 1920s as part of the Georgia Writers Project.
Yep.
And it talks about a cemetery and a praise house here. So you have all these things coming together.
Yeah, Drums and Shadows is about as academic as it gets.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I mean, that's one of the Bibles of knowledge.
Well, and it's interesting because the descendants of the people that are interviewed from the 1920s are
Right.
still in this area and down White Bluff, and we've talked to them, and they all have the same story. Yeah, there was a slave era graveyard here that was superseded by the Cedar Grove graveyard that was named Cedar Grove to commemorate when it was on this road right here, which was a dirt road that designated the Cedar Grove plantation, and here we are.
Sure. Well, and there's a lot of protectionism legally for cemeteries in Georgia. I mean, some of it's real ironclad.
Well, and it's also
Some of it's federal.
Oh yeah, and it's important. I am a very big property rights person. I truly do believe, when you have your right to your own property, to own it.
Correct.
But I also believe that there has to be some level of preservation.
Agreed.
And when there's no direct need, which this land has sat vacant, or unattended, I should say, because it was never really vacant. There was always graves there. There was always that memory there. It sat there from 1894 at least, and how long before then we don't know for sure, because the records are a little bit sketchy there. But from when John Ezra Henley bought it until he left it in his will, when he developed the Westwood neighborhood, it was 30 acres.
Yeah.
He sold off everything
Okay.
except for this one little tiny plot.
for a reason.
He kept this one for a reason, and when he died, in his will, it was left to the Negro congregation or the burial society. And I believe that the burial society is none other, and also some of the writings of one of his descendants that was from the 1976. It was in a letter to W.W. Law, who's very famous here in Savannah, obviously, and really North America. In this letter from John Ezra Henley's descendant, he mentions that there was a group of people that his great-great-uncle, or great-great-grandfather, I believe it was John Ezra Henley, who had dealings with, and they were called the Book of Love Burial Society.
Love that.
And they were, what they did, I don't know, I use the word, they were speakers of the dead. I've always liked that term, where they remembered those who died during the era of slavery. And immediately after, they recorded it in a book. Now this is where it gets kind of cool. John Ezra Henley gained access to the book by bribing them with a fifth of bourbon. And because of that, he was able to get in and copy down the names and the histories, the brief histories that they had on the note cards. And he made his own filing system.
Yeah.
And in the writings of his descendant, it says that through this, he was able to locate many of the secret burial spots that had existed before then. Because a lot of times what you had when you had these big plantations, they would kind of segment off a little corner, and that's where, you know, slaves would be buried, but also you had visitor cemeteries that were there.
Right.
Because, you know, nowadays we can't even imagine that you would bury somebody temporarily, and then when they go back home, they would dig them up and bring them back home and bury them where they were going.
Right.
But that is indeed what I believe this served as, is it was both the, at that time, slave cemetery, and it was the visitor cemetery, as where the graves are located in regards to where the praise house most likely sat. That's kind of really what it indicates.
Gotcha. Well, all very important stuff. Very valuable. I mean, I think it's really a beautiful discovery, but it's not without controversy. So, what is some of the pushback that you want to talk about, and then also, how about the community support?
Well, what I've really ran into, first off, when I must fully admit, you know, full disclosure, my opposition was mainly when I found out what they wanted to build here. They wanted to build a maintenance yard right here in the backyard. This is a residential neighborhood.
Yep. And
they were going to push into it to build a maintenance yard. So my opposition was based on that originally. And so I went around and I got signatures from everybody in the entire community. Everyone that I made contact with, 100% of them said, no, we don't want this in our neighborhood.
Right.
And it was about 60% of everybody, the families in the neighborhood.
Gotcha.
Well, once the Municipal Planning Commission approved it on December 20th, I only had until January of the next month to really find something. And boy, you know, did that happen. From that time on, it's just been discovery after discovery after discovery, because all the documentation, every bit of it,
right, says
this is a cemetery and has been for 2 centuries.
Right.
But the problem is there is such pushback from the school and really the headmaster in particular, and that was kind of really disturbing to me when I look at it as this: if I thought there was even a 5% chance that this was a cemetery and I didn't need it, because really it's 0.88 acres. It's not like it's a huge piece of land.
Right.
It's less than an acre. Would it be nice for them to be able to use it to expand? Yeah, I understand land is important when you're a school stuck in the middle of residential. Yep. I get that. And I'm not unsympathetic to it.
Right.
However, I don't think that you should be expanding at the cost of history.
Yeah.
There are some times when you...
And that kind of history.
Yes, this kind of history that tells the story of Nicholsonville, which is actually also the story. There is a historical church called Nicholsonville Baptist Church, which is tied to this area so tightly.
Yeah.
And that's part of the confusion. when there's no true need to develop it,
Right.
why don't we use this to teach and to learn and to celebrate, that rich history that we do have in Savannah, which is really unlike almost any place in America.
Yeah, very.
It has almost a European feel because of the age and the history and the fact that we are building on top of graveyards sometimes, a lot of times.
Yeah.
And
small area.
it is.
Yeah.
And to me, this was this is an opportunity to look and say, well, what do we have here? Well, for one, we have the most likely location for the praise house is right between these trees, and that kind of open area right there. I found remains of what looks to be foundations. They wouldn't have had the same, it wouldn't be a slab or anything like that. It would be foundations to where the slave house would have sat on it.
Sure.
And so I found several pads right over there. And then we had multiple people that had grown up here in the 60s as kids and had played back here, over 30. Now I have over 30 people
Right.
that have said, when I played, and it was the closest to where I live right here, about 30, 40 feet out from the fence line, from the property line, is where they said they found graves, actual graves.
Yeah.
And this is the crazy thing. They said, there were markers, there were graves. Some people had actually dug and found bones.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they were told, those kids who did that, they were told by their parents, don't mess with it.
Right.
You can play, but do not disturb those graves. Over time, I think a lot of those headstones did go missing. There were clay markers. One of the kids said, he's like, I never really played there. I never saw the headstones there. However, I had a neighbor that was here that had 9 of the headstones. Now they're the ones with a little loop, a bigger, and then a smaller one. They're made out of clay.
Right.
I know Savannah's had issue with those because people took them off graves, not knowing what they were, or knowing what they were and not caring.
Yeah.
And used them in their gardens a lot.
For sure.
So he did not know that history, though, but he was able to accurately describe exactly, well, I've learned a lot from you, from your tours.
Yeah.
Where I was like, I know exactly what you're talking about. So you have that. You have primitive type of pores that were done later.
Yeah.
They appear to be like 1930s, 1950s, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
Where people would have come out, and they called it Remembrance Day, where you go, and a lot of times it's made with crushed up shells that have been burnt, the oyster shells, that's added into a concrete, and then crushed glass is put into it so it's reflective and can kind of luminesce
Right.
at the same time. Well, that's been found scattered all over. So there's signs of that, but it seems like the response, unfortunately, has been very dismissive. Well, in fact, for sure, for when I called you, because I didn't want to just make any assumptions. I wanted to say, hey, I need people that actually know to look at these things. So I've reached out to you. I've reached out to people like Pat Gunn. I've reached out to archaeologists. And the response, we're walking, you see this fence. This fence happened the day after you yourself came out and
That's
said,
right.
There's a strong probability that these are remembrance type pores.
Yep.
They're clearly not construction. They're not waste from that, because they're well, the one we saw, looked like it was in a pipe and had been, the pipe was probably cut, and then because it had been shaped, but yet it was clearly not meant to be structural in any way, because of the stuff that was embedded in it, clearly on purpose. The very next day, they're putting the fence up.
Yeah, they weren't too happy about bringing more eyes on it.
No.
And, and really, I guess I can, from a curious seeker standpoint, understand that. But at the same time, it seems a little overkill. I mean, I noted that, in my estimation, from having been around some of the Gullah Geechee cemeteries, other primitive cemeteries in the South, that those concrete pours were definitely Remembrance Day style, like, the old headstone was gone, or if it was ever there, who knows, probably some memory of it. They placed those things there in the early mid-20th century to highlight the fact that this is where the grave was or is. So that's how I interpreted that. But, at first glance, that was my conclusion. And then, the fence went up. the next day.
The fence went up. There's been no contact.
Yeah.
I'm still working, but my plans are now, I'm working with some preservation societies here in Georgia
Yeah.
to get this registered as an archaeological site.
Gotcha.
Because there is no doubt in my mind, based on everything that we've seen, that it at least warrants archaeological survey.
Agree.
That
I
we
agree.
should find out what's here.
Yeah, like real surveys and not just sort of basic ground penetrating, maybe they know what they're looking at, maybe they don't.
Well, that's the other thing too, with the ground penetrating radar that was supposedly done here. We were, and when I say we, I'm talking about my alderman Kurt Purdy is very curious as to what's going on here too. They had promised, oh, we'll give you the raw data. You can have anybody look at it that is experienced. Because I don't know how to read GPR data.
Yeah.
But I've found people that are.
Mm-hmm.
So of course I would want people to look at it and tell me what their opinions are. After promising it, they have now reneged on that. There's no communication. They're refusing to share the data. So we're kind of at an impasse because I just really want to give praise to every single member of the city council. All of them are opposed to this. So
Right.
It's not going anywhere on that front.
Yeah.
But I truly get the feeling that their plan is to just kind of let it die down, let people forget about it, and then ram it through again, because I base that off of how they tried to do it this time.
Gotcha.
So my goal is to get it registered as an archaeological site, to use that to get that elevated to a historical site,
Yeah.
and then for the neighborhood in general, the more I dug into it, the more I learned about John Ezra Henley, the more I was absolutely fascinated by what a fantastic individual he appears to have been.
Yeah.
Just his history is so rich, and it leads to other history and how this part of Savannah, that while it's not downtown, it still has an incredibly rich history.
Now, could you speak to him for a minute, because he was white?
He was white. He moved here and purchased this 30 acres. And his old houses are actually still on White Bluff, the ones that he lived in.
Huh.
There's 2 white clapboard houses down there that he lived in. He had a small store that he used, and his main customers were the freed black population that was right here.
And could you just describe the era, the time frame of that?
Oh, and this is right after the end of slavery.
Okay.
So this is,
Post-Civil War.
Post-Civil War.
Antebellum.
Very antebellum, height of Reconstructionism. Tensions were high.
Yes.
And there was a lot of animosity, and he didn't care.
Right.
He just and it wasn't just, I'm going to make money off these people. One of the stories, I love this story. I mentioned before, Nicholsonville Baptist Church. It's not very far over that way. It's right at a mile. And apparently he and a friend of his, who had to have been black, because there's no way the 2 white guys would have snuck in and did what happened. But his friend and him had snuck into the church during a wedding. They had climbed up in the rafters. And as the preacher was pronouncing them husband and wife, the couple that was getting married, apparently John Israel yelled down from the rafters, "You better hold on to that tiger." And it caused such an uproar in the congregation that it says that they had to quietly abscond off out the back door. And so he seems like he was a real character. He seemed that he truly cared about his community.
Sounds like it.
And because you have stories like that, you have him documenting with the historical society, the Book of Love.
Yeah, I love that. The Book of Love.
And so it's just
beautiful. And the Burial Society.
The Book of Love Burial Society.
Ah, wow.
And it's just, so my dream for this property is to see it come into some sort of receivership where the story of John Ezra Henley can be sold, where the stories of Nicholsonville can be told, because Nicholsonville was called the thriftiest, and this is from a period piece, so don't kill me, but it was the thriftiest Negro community in all of Georgia.
Uh-huh.
And their history is amazing too, because they purchased this land. They were deeded this land, a portion of land over there, with a 7-year mortgage, and they paid it off either 2 or 4 years, because it kind of varies.
Yeah.
Early.
Uh-huh.
But they paid it off using oysters and fishing and making nets, and they would take them into town. And every week, the man would come to make the treasurer would come and make the payment. He would carry it in a pillowcase slung over his back with nickels and dimes and pennies, and he had 2 guards that would go with him to keep him safe. You know, it kind of was implied to maybe keep him safe from him, but it was pretty funny the way it was worded. But they paid off their mortgage early and were just an incredible community that came, out of slavery.
Right. It's a low country story.
It's a low country story that resonates today.
Yes.
You know, it's not where you started, it's where you're going.
And it often gets, let's face it, out here in no man's land with urban development and the advancement of motorized society, it gets buried in suburbia.
Yeah, we don't realize that just the few miles that we are from downtown Savannah, better part of the day, going down there. Yeah. Especially if you're carrying everything to sell. There was what they called the Oyster Road, and it ran parallel to White Bluff, and they would walk down there, set up shop, sell. Their nets.
Women got baskets on their heads.
Oh yeah,
the whole thing.
Into the whole thing, and it wasn't that long ago.
That's right. That's right.
We're 100 years removed from that.
I know.
And this road over there was still a dirt road.
Or 100 years connected.
However you want to look from it, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's neat to see that what can be accomplished with the community.
Yep.
Because it wasn't just one man. It wasn't just John Ezra Henley. It wasn't any of the one people that came from St. Catherine's. They all formed a community. Mm-hmm. And that community is what was their strength. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, this isn't just about, an old burial site.
Right.
It's the history, the story still speaks to us today if we listen.
And speaking of listening, I think probably the people watching this, like myself, hear the jubilant laughter of children on a playground at the nearby school. It's about future generations, their learning, the richness of their spirit, this kind of thing adding to them as individuals and beings, sentient beings in the world. So that laughter is so, it's really about the future. It's not just about the past. It's really about them.
And that's why I want to make it clear, I'm not opposed to the school being, right in my backyard. I love hearing the kids playing.
Yeah, it's joyful.
This land, though, there's something about it. Mm-hmm. It is sacred land.
Yeah, I think that's
the people buried there, from the stories from them before them, from the generations that come after. I don't want to see this just plowed under and made another little industrial slice of something bigger. This instead has the opportunity to teach lessons that you can't learn in the classroom.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really here for everyone.
Everyone, yeah.
And I also think, if in my mind, based on all the evidence that you've uncovered and others have uncovered, I just see like a map of this corner, and all of that evidence, each piece of it is an arrow surrounding this plot, and it's all pointing to the fact that it's here.
Yeah.
So, or it's been here. So, well, John, is there anything else that you want to say as far as movements in certain directions? Anything
the biggest
positive
thing,
or whatever?
Well, is if anybody has interest in helping, please reach out to you. I know you can get them in touch with me. I'm
when you say helping, you mean research?
Helping research. There is a plan, and what
are some of your needs then, in that respect?
Really, it's just right now I'm not alone anymore, but I was alone when we started.
Right.
So really, if anybody has experience with this, there's a lot of organizational things.
Families. That's maybe the call I want to make here, John, is that for anybody watching that has any sense memory of this, or remembers a family member or neighbor, friend talking about this cemetery, any real-time memories here, and there's any record of that, living or otherwise, please reach out in the comments here on the Bonaventure Official Facebook page, and put your, you know, 10 cents in the mix, because it could add up to a greater collective understanding.
Well, I know that there are descendants of the people who are buried here out there that may have a memory like you're talking about. That that's how found out about from the descendant of John Ezra Henley.
Yeah.
So she saw a Facebook post and says, "Hey, I have a copy of his will that talks about this land."
Yeah.
So there's stuff like that still out there today.
For sure. Absolutely fascinating. Well, John Perry, what a noble cause, noble fight, noble pursuit, really. This is, you know, I think the stuff that life's made of, as Ben Franklin said. But gang, we've been here with John Perry. We're grateful for his time and the discussion of we'll call it again, the cemetery controversy.
The Cedar Grove Cemetery.
The Cedar Grove Cemetery debate, you know, but it's really, I think, there's a lot of truth here that's been uncovered. And you know, I'm glad just to learn about it, you know, no matter the end result, but I hope the end result is, you know, the one you've spoken of or visualized. Well, gang, this has been Shannon Scott with Grave Talks, and if you've enjoyed this, we appreciate your participation. Please consider going to my YouTube channel, Grave Talks with Shannon Scott on YouTube, and subscribing, as that kind of support helps me bring this kind of cause or ambition and pursuit to the foreground of understanding, and I like to keep it informational, entertaining. So we really appreciate everything. And once more, John, thank you.
Well, thank
and we'll
you,
be in
Ken.
touch.
All right.
Thank you, sir.